She didn't know his name, didn't ask where he came from, what secret could a jacket hold. All she saw was a man sitting alone in the rain, shivering, silent, and something in her heart said, give, so she did. Her grandfather's old army jacket, the one he wore through war and came home in, she handed it to a stranger and walked away. A week later, a helicopter landed in her town, and the man she thought she'd never see again stepped out wearing the jacket, but this time with 4 stars on his shoulder. This is what happens when quiet kindness reaches someone powerful enough to carry it forward forever. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The rain had settled in like it meant to stay, not a gentle drizzle, not a passing storm, but a steady, cold Montana downpour that made the wind feel like it had teeth. It was mid-October in the town of Helena Ridge, a place so small most folks didn't lock their doors, but always locked their hearts until you earned your way in. Lauren Bennett tugged her scarf higher around her chin as she stepped out of the old bookstore where she worked part-time. The bell above the door gave a tired chime behind her. Swallowed quickly by the sound of rain hitting the sidewalk in sharp rhythmic taps, she was 22, just out of community college, living in the old clapboard house with her grandmother and working 6 days a week to figure out what came next. The truth was Lauren didn't know. She wasn't one for big dreams or bold moves, but she believed in showing up, doing things quietly, steadily, kindly the way her grandfather had done. Her boots splashed through a shallow puddle as she walked toward the bus stop at the edge of town. The sky was an endless stretch of gray, and the street lights hadn't turned on yet. The only color in sight was the red and gold leaves clinging stubbornly to the maples. That's when she saw him, hunched under the narrow shelter of the old bus bench, soaked to the bone, not moving, not shivering, just sitting there. His coat hung in heavy folds, his jeans were dark with water, his shoulders were drawn tight, not from the cold, but from something else, something heavier. Lauren slowed. Instinctively, he looked tired, but not just tired like you've had a long day, tired like the weight of the world had been on his back for too long, tired like he had forgotten how to ask for help and wouldn't even if he remembered. She took a few more steps then stopped. She knew better. Her grandmother had taught her that you don't approach strangers alone, especially not at night, especially not men. But this wasn't the city, this was Helena Ridge. And something in her chest, a quiet certain pull, told her not to walk past. She reached into her coat pocket, fidgeted with her keys, her fingers brushed something rough, familiar. The jacket, it was old, army green, worn thin in the elbows, her grandfather's jacket, the one he'd worn back in the Korean War, then on every fishing trip, every Veterans Day, every walk around the yard until the year he passed. Lauren never wore it out, not really, but today had been colder than she expected. And she'd thrown it on without thinking. Now she hesitated. It was more than a coat, it was memory, it was history. It still smelled faintly like cedar and tobacco, but when she looked back at the man on the bench, something in her heart cracked. She walked up slowly, stopping just shy of the shelter. Excuse me, sir, she said gently, are you okay? The man looked up slow and deliberate, like every movement had to be measured first. His eyes were dark, sharp, tired. I'm fine, he said. His voice was rough, like gravel on asphalt, but not unkind, just waiting out the rain. Lauren nodded, but she knew better. She looked down at the coat she was wearing, then back at him. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. In one fluid motion, she shrugged the jacket off her shoulders. It was still warm from her body, still dry here. She said, holding it out, please. It's too cold for anyone to be out like this. The man blinked. I can't take that, he said quietly. It's all right, Lauren replied. Her voice was soft, but steady. It's not just a jacket, it belonged to someone who always gave more than he kept. I think he'd want you to have it tonight. The man didn't speak right away. He reached out slowly, carefully, took the jacket in both hands, held it for a moment, then met her gaze with something deep, something knowing. Thank you, he said, then paused and added almost to himself, that's exactly what your father would have done. Lauren froze just for a second. He was my grandfather, she said. His name was James, Sergeant James Bennett. The man gave a small nod, not surprised. Then without another word, he stood up, pulling the jacket around his shoulders, and walked off into the rain. No bus, no umbrella, no name, just gone. Lauren stood there in the mist for a long minute, then turned and went home. Her grandmother was waiting at the table when she came in, folding laundry in her lap. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and mothballs. Where's your coat, sweetheart? The older woman asked. Lauren hesitated, then sat down across from her. I gave it away, she said quietly. There was a man at the bus stop. He looked so cold, so alone. I didn't know what else to do. Her grandmother didn't scold her, didn't ask questions. She just nodded slowly and reached over to take her hand. You did right, she said. Your granddad would have been proud. Later that night, Lauren pulled the old photo album from the top shelf in the hallway. She found the black and white picture, her grandfather in uniform, standing straight in front of a canvas tent, the same jacket on his back, the same quiet strength in his eyes. She lit a small candle, made the photo, and placed it beside a folded American flag that hadn't moved from its place in years. Then she whispered, I gave your coat away today, Grandpa. I hope wherever you are, it found its way back to you, and maybe in some small Way it did, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness is a full circle moment. Sometimes giving a jacket is more than warmth, it's remembrance, it's legacy, it's love. And in the quiet rain of a Montana evening, one stranger walked away wrapped in something deeper than cloth. He walked away carrying a piece of something sacred. The jacket was gone, but the feeling it left behind stayed. Lauren Bennett didn't tell many people about what happened that night. There wasn't really anyone to tell, just her grandmother in the old photograph now sitting quietly beneath a candle by the window. By Monday, life had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Morning bus shift at the bookstore, evenings helping her grandmother refill pill trays and fold laundry, nights spent applying for scholarships she didn't believe she'd win, and staring at the ceiling trying to convince herself that her world wasn't already mapped out by circumstance. She didn't expect anything to come from it, not the jacket, not the gesture, not even hope. But sometimes the world watches us when we're not looking. Can one act of kindness rewrite a life? The bookstore was quiet that week. October air crept in through the warped window frames. Lauren stacked books by genre, dusted shelves no one touched, and sipped weak coffee from a paper cup. She didn't talk much unless a customer asked. She just did her work carefully. She remembered titles by heart, remembered faces, too, not out of obligation, but because noticing people felt like something her grandfather would have done. On Wednesday morning, Mrs. Langley came in again. She was 93, nearly blind, and proud enough not to admit it. She fumbled for her wallet at checkout, then froze, her hand shaking. "I dear," she whispered, "I left it on the counter at home again." Lauren smiled. "It's all right, Mrs. Langley, pay next time." The old woman blinked behind thick glasses. "But this is a hardcover, it's also a good story," Lauren replied softly. "And you shouldn't go another night without it." No one saw. No one clapped, no one knew, but kindness has its own way of echoing. Friday afternoon, she was stocking paperbacks when a man walked in, tall, mid-40s maybe, in a dark overcoat. He moved with a quiet confidence, but something about him made the air shift when he entered. He didn't browse, didn't make small talk. He walked straight up to the front counter and looked Lauren in the eye. "You gave someone a jacket," he said, "last week in the rain, military green. Older stitching." Lauren blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, I did," she said slowly. "It was my grandfather's." The man nodded once. "Do you know what generation it belonged to?" he asked. She hesitated. The question felt pointed. "Korean War," she said. "He was a Sergeant James Bennett." The man gave a long, unreadable look, then he smiled just barely. "I see," he said. "Thank you." Then he turned, walked out the door, and disappeared down the sidewalk. He never gave his name, never said who he was looking for, and never came back. Lauren stood frozen for several seconds, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. Was it a test, a coincidence? Or had the jacket, her grandfather's jacket, found its way into hands that truly understood what it meant? That night, she told her grandmother. The older woman looked at her for a long time, then reached into a drawer Lauren hadn't seen opened in years. She pulled out a faded envelope, yellowed, edges curled, sealed in plastic. "This," her grandmother said, "was with the jacket when he came home. He never talked about the war much, but he kept this." Lauren opened it carefully. Inside was a folded page, an old Army inventory form, typed "Official," and at the bottom in pen, "Issued to SGT James E. Bennett, 1st Marine Division, 1952, return not required, return not required." That line stuck in Lauren's chest like a heartbeat she hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was never just about the jacket, maybe it was about letting it continue something her grandfather started. The week passed slowly. No more strangers came, no letters arrived, no phone calls, but people noticed in quiet ways. At the supermarket, Lauren helped a veteran in his 70s find his truck keys. At the library, she gave up her only umbrella to a mother walking her toddler home in the rain. Nobody clapped, nobody posted it online, but little by little, something was shifting in the town of Helena Ridge. They didn't say it out loud, but they started seeing her. One afternoon while walking back from the post office, Lauren saw a small crowd gathered near the flagpole in front of the high school. At first, she thought it was a drill until she heard the horn, a military bugle, soft, slow taps. She stopped, hand shielding her eyes from the low sun. It was a brief ceremony, quiet. One of the local veterans had passed, someone from the old VFW hall. She didn't know him, but she stood still anyway, head bowed until the final note faded into the wind, and someone in the crowd, a woman in uniform, turned to her and said, "You're Lauren Bennett, aren't you?" Lauren nodded, surprised. "My husband told me about you," the woman said. "He said, the next generation still remembers." Then she saluted, not sharply, not formally, just enough to make Lauren's throat tighten and her knees feel a little less steady. That night, she pulled down her scholarship forms again. She hadn't touched them in weeks. The essays were half finished, the transcript still unsigned, but something in her had changed. She picked up a pen, took a breath, and wrote 3 words at the top of the next page, because he believed her grandfather, a man who never asked for recognition, a man who kept serving. Even now through her, Lauren didn't know what would come next, but somehow she felt ready to meet it. The fog rolled in before dawn. It hugged the ground like a low whisper, wrapping around fence posts and mailboxes, blanketing Helena Ridge in a quiet stillness that felt almost holy. By 6:10 a.m., the streets were barely awake. Just the milkman's van, the flicker of a porch light, and a stray dog crossing the main road. Lauren Bennett had just poured coffee for her grandmother when the sound shattered the silence. It started low, a thrum, a vibration in the window pane, then came the unmistakable whoop 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 of blades slicing through morning air. A helicopter, not news, not medical, not weather, military. She stepped out onto the porch in her slippers, coffee still in hand, her breath fogged in the air, and above her, through the thinning mist, came the shape, a UH-60 Blackhawk, gray, steady, and descending toward the field behind the elementary school. It landed with slow precision, the rotors kicking up leaves and loose gravel. A dozen people saw it happen, then a dozen more. Within minutes, the town was stirring like someone had lit a match under it. Lauren stood frozen, the mug in her hand trembled slightly because stepping down from that aircraft was the man she'd given her grandfather's jacket to, and he wasn't hunched anymore. He wasn't wet or anonymous, he wore a full dress uniform, the insignia on his shoulder gleaming even in the fog. 4 stars, General Raymond Cole. By the time the convoy reached their street, word had already spread. Lauren heard the first knock on the door just as her grandmother let out a soft gasp from the window. "Lauren," she whispered, a voice tight. "They're here, he's here." Lauren opened the door slowly. The general was already on the porch, hat under one arm, 2 aides behind him. A few local deputies standing respectfully back near the road. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, voice low and certain. Lauren nodded, barely able to find her breath. He offered a small smile, more grateful than formal. "I believe you and I met in the rain." She didn't respond right away, just looked at him, clean-cut, composed, but those same eyes that had once been heavy under a storm, now steady. "I didn't know who you were," she said, her voice small. "I know," he replied, "that's why I came back." Inside the house, they sat in the living room. Her grandmother brought out extra coffee, hands trembling too much to hide it, and left them alone. General Cole removed a folder from his briefcase and set it on the coffee table. "This is for you," he said. Lauren stared at it, unsure what to do. "I need to explain something first," he continued. "For the past few months, I've been part of a classified review, something the Army calls Bridging Generations. It's a pilot program connecting veterans with civilians who demonstrate qualities we once believed only came from wearing the uniform." He paused. "We've traveled from coast to coast, observing, listening, and watching." Lauren frowned slightly. "Watching?" The general gave a small nod. "You weren't chosen by accident, Miss Bennett. Someone saw you on a rainy night give something sacred, not because you were asked, not for a camera, but because it was the right thing to do." He opened the folder, inside a certificate with her name in bold script, and beneath it, "The Department of the Army and Bridging Generations Initiative recognized Lauren Elizabeth Bennett for demonstrating in both action and spirit the timeless values of honor, service, and quiet leadership in a manner reflective of the best traditions of the United States Armed Forces." At the bottom, one line stood out in gold leaf: "A soldier's heart, even without a soldier's uniform." Lauren blinked hard, her throat tightened. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," General Cole replied. "You already did when you gave that jacket away." He reached back into his case and pulled out a second envelope. "This," he said, "is an invitation. The foundation has authorized a full scholarship for one civilian participant from each region, someone who represents the spirit of the veterans who came before them." He placed it gently on the table. "It's yours if you'll accept it." By 8 a.m., most of the town had gathered on the street. People stood on porches, lined sidewalks, farmers still in overalls, teachers with coffee mugs in hand, local veterans in faded ball caps. Blinking against the wind, they watched as General Cole stepped outside with Lauren at his side. The applause wasn't loud, but it was full. Hands clapped slowly, steadily, no cheering, just reverence. And then one by one veterans approached, some from wars Lauren had only read about, some still limping from the ones she remembered on TV. Each of them shook her hand. "Thank you," one whispered. "For reminding us," said another, "why we stood in the first place." Her grandmother cried quietly behind her, not out of sadness, but because in that moment it felt like James Bennett had come home again. They stayed for just under an hour. The helicopter didn't roar when it left, it lifted like a prayer, quiet, powerful, gone. And when it did, Helena Ridge didn't feel small anymore. It felt seen because of one young woman and one quiet act of kindness that refused to be forgotten. The scholarship came with a letter, no fanfare, no ribbon, just a simple envelope with her name written in clean block letters, inside full tuition, housing, a paid internship, and one line typed near the bottom, "Because sometimes the next chapter begins with one simple act of honor." Lauren Bennett sat at the kitchen table, staring at it, her hands still trembling from holding something that felt too big to be hers. Across from her, her grandmother dabbed at her eyes with a folded tissue. "Your granddad," she whispered, "would be grinning so hard right now, he'd crack his dentures." Lauren smiled, soft, uneven, the kind that only happens when a heart is still catching up with the good it's been given. Within a month, Lauren had moved into a small apartment near the town center, still in Helena Ridge, but just close enough to the newly renovated Veteran Resource Office where she'd started working 3 afternoons a week. Her official title was long, something like Community Engagement Assistant for Veteran Civilian Programs, but to Lauren, it just meant this: listening, connecting, remembering. She helped organize field trips where middle school Kids visited the VFW hall, wrote letters to active duty soldiers, and listened to veterans tell stories that had gone untold for decades. She didn't wear a uniform, but in every room she entered, there was quiet respect, not for what she carried on her shoulders, but for what she carried in her heart. The jacket didn't come back to her, and that was okay. Because a few weeks later she stood inside the Helena Ridge Veterans Hall in front of a newly installed glass case by the entryway. Inside the case was the coat, pressed, cleaned, preserved. Above it all, a bronze plaque that read, "Kindness is a legacy, too," in honor of Sergeant James E. Bennett and the granddaughter who reminded us what service still means. Lauren didn't cry, not in that moment, but she did rest her hand on the glass, and for a long time, she just stood there, letting it sink in, letting him go, and letting him stay. The dedication ceremony was quiet, fold-out chairs, a single microphone, a row of solemn faces, most of them lined by time and softened by memory. Near the back sat a man with silver hair, tucked beneath a Vietnam-era cap. His name was Walter Grady. He didn't speak until the very end, didn't raise his hand, didn't ask for attention, but when the crowd had started to disperse, he stepped forward. It steady, slowed, tapped the mic twice with a trembling finger. "Name's Walter," he said, voice gravel-soft, served with the first Cav, 68 to 70. He looked around the room. "I've seen a lot of things, brave things, ugly things, things I've never talked about." "Not really." He paused, then nodded toward Lauren. "But last month, I saw something else. A girl, just a girl, giving away a jacket like it was the only thing she had. No questions, no hesitation, no camera around." He glanced down at the floor, collecting his breath. "I used to think things like that, the small kindnesses, died with our generation." He looked up. "I was wrong." A silence followed, then someone clapped. Then another, until the room filled not with applause but with recognition, the quiet kind, the kind that says, "We see you now." Lauren kept the thank you notes in a shoebox. Students from the middle school, veterans from the town over, a mother from out of state who'd heard the story online and wrote, "You reminded me my dad's service still matters." But one letter she kept separately, folded carefully, carried sometimes, written on thick paper in firm handwriting. "Oh Lauren, you didn't know it, but that jacket was more than fabric, it was legacy. And the way you gave it away without knowing who I was, without asking for anything, reminded me what we once fought for, not land, not medals, but dignity, humanity, decency. You brought that back. You don't know it, but you kept me standing. Thank you." General Raymond Cole. She never framed it, never showed it off. She kept it tucked in the bottom of her desk drawer beside a paperclip and an old army button that had fallen off her grandfather's shirt years ago. Because some words aren't meant to be displayed, they're meant to be carried. On the 1-year anniversary, Lauren walked out to the field where the helicopter had landed. The grass had grown tall again, wildflowers had returned near the fence line. She stood there alone, early in the morning, long before the town stirred. In her hand, the letter, folded neatly, faintly creased. She didn't say much, just looked out at the horizon where fog was rising gently off the ground, the same way it had that morning. A soft breeze brushed past her. She could almost hear it again, that low hum of rotor blades slicing the dawn. But more than that, she could feel it, that maybe, just maybe, her grandfather had seen it too, that someone's kindness didn't have to die with them, it could be handed forward. And in one simple moment, in the pouring rain, with a jacket and a quiet heart, she'd done exactly that. Lauren folded the letter once more, slipped it into her coat pocket, and walked back home, because sometimes the smallest gestures live the longest. And sometimes one jacket can change everything. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.